As of last month, there are more than 27 million refugees across the world. This is the highest number ever recorded, according to the UN. A large proportion of these people originate from Syria, Venezuela, and Afghanistan. Each year, the U.S. hosts thousands of refugees from various countries, but with increasing conflicts in the Middle East and the ongoing war in Ukraine, this refugee cap has been raised to 125,000 people per year. While this may seem like a high number, it's minuscule compared to other countries. Turkey is currently the largest host country in the world, currently home to 3.8 million refugees.
I think there's this misconception that refugees leave their countries by choice. And for refugees, there isn't a choice. You're forced to leave home, whether it's because of persecution or fear of being harmed or war or famine. You don't have a choice. And it's like I always ask people, it's like, what would it take for you to leave your home and your country? And there's no choice in it, right?
That's Luma Muffley, the CEO and founder of the educational nonprofit Refugee's Family. She says no one has an easy time leaving their home country. It's not just a place where they live, but it embodies their culture, customs, and identity. Dr. Dia Abdo adds that these refugees meet a very specific set of circumstances that have left them with no other choice.
The reason a person becomes designated as a refugee is because they cannot return to their country for fear for their life and their family's life. So a person becomes a refugee because they are persecuted and have to leave their country because of a well-founded fear. And it's really based on 5 factors. It's political identity, nationality, ethnicity, race, and religion. And so many refugees leave, almost all refugees leave because they cannot stay. It is dangerous to stay. They are fleeing war. They are fleeing terrorism. They are fleeing death. They're fleeing conflict.
Abdo is a second-generation Palestinian refugee born and raised in Jordan and the author of American Refuge, True Stories of the Refugee Experience. In 2015, Abdo founded the organization Every Campus a Refuge, which helps house refugee families on university campuses and supports their resettlement. Abdo says that this population enters the U.S. with several challenges stacked up against them.
When refugees arrive in this country, they only get a one-time stipend of $1,000, give or take, maybe it's $1,025 per person. So that's the only fund that they get. That's the welcome fund that they get. And they also have to pay back their plane ticket that brought them to the US. So in many ways, they've incurred debt almost immediately. So there's very little material resources. There's the trauma. There's also the challenge of language and language barriers, especially if they have limited proficiency in English. Of course, they speak many other languages, but to be able to access the majority of the social services in this country, the health systems, the social systems, you need to be fluent in English and to understand how phone systems work and to understand how transportation works. So there's that challenge of language.
Abdo points out that the Refugee Resettlement Program in the U.S. expects this population to achieve self-sufficiency within 90 days.
That means being able to stand up on your own 2 feet and pay your rent and take care of your kids and have a job within 90 days. So if you factor in the trauma, the language challenge, potentially, the material challenge, the financial challenge, it really adds up as a recipe for failure, not for success for most refugees.
This leads to many refugees being stuck in limbo. They're not able to go back to their home countries because of prolonged conflict and destruction, but they don't have the resources to properly build a life in the place they now live.
Most refugees, 99% of refugees, remain in refugee camps or unsettled or settled in some way in parts of the world where they do not achieve belonging and citizenship and welcome.
Abdo argues that refugees entering the U.S. or any other country also need adequate mental health services in order to unpack and work through this trauma.
You are a refugee because you have escaped, really, by the skin of your teeth, a bomb or an explosion or a massacre, right? So there is a great deal of trauma that refugees have, not only from the moment of rupture, which causes them to leave, but also the traumatic experience since then, right? So when refugees leave their country, It's not an easy trip to resettlement. In fact, it takes years, right? Refugees leave. They land somewhere in a country next door where they live in refugee camps. And that life in itself is traumatic because you're stateless, right? You're living in a refugee camp. So you don't have access to citizenship. You don't have access to the benefits that citizens of that country have. You have to make do living in that refugee camp.
Both Abdo and Muffley believe that there need to be better support systems in place to create a network that refugees can rely on. This not only includes greater access to mental health services, education, and job training, but also a helping hand in cultural assimilation.
Small things like having a meal with my college friends, and I double dipped. I didn't know what double dipping was because in Arab culture, you share a plate, everybody's eating out of the same big communal plate. In America, you don't do that. And I was like, what? You just double dip. It's normal, right? Democracy. I hadn't lived in a democracy and understanding what that was and what my vote meant. And then it's like everything. It's like you're part of you, like you're transported into a new world. People may look like you, but you've got some big differences and trying to figure out what they were and how to adjust.
Muffley adds that a welcoming atmosphere is essential in setting up refugees for success.
Have a neighbor greet them at the airport, right? Like not a caseworker. Have familiar food in their apartment when they arrive, simple things. And I mean, we're a nation of immigrants. Pair them up with someone from similar background that can be their host family. Things I had when I came as an international student here was a host family. It was awesome, right? Like I had a place to go for Thanksgiving. They taught me like where to go to get a bank account, like my driver's license. I didn't feel like a customer. I felt like this is a relationship. These are people that care about me.
Abdo also agrees that embracing refugees begins at the community level. Her organization, Every Campus a Refuge, supports people during this critical period. She says that college campuses are a perfect setting for this kind of program because it has key resources like housing, health clinics, and cafeterias.
We say that it's a way for us to offer refugees a softer landing and a stronger beginning so that they're not hitting the ground running. The Refugee Resettlement Program really expects folks to hit the ground running. This gives folks a few months where they can settle in, not spend that welcome fund, get a job, get their social security numbers, and then save their money and then find a place in the city where they would like to live.
It's important to remember that sometimes the smallest gestures can make all the difference to someone in an unfamiliar place. To find out more about this topic and our guests, Dr. Dia Abdo and Luma Muffley, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri and Grace Galante. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
There was a kid from South Philly, a third floor walk-up, had left me standing at mid-court before 10 or 11,000 fans.
One man's journey from fighting to play in the NBA to becoming Coach of the Year. Then,
for those kids' parents, that white t-shirt would have been seen as underwear. So for them to wear it out the house sort of by itself would have kind of raised eyebrows, which no doubt they were keen to do.
The evolution of the classic white tee. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.